when I started writing in 2020 when it was the first article I wrote. And back then my English was grammar sucked, my writing sucked, and it was my first ever article which was heavily edited. So if any one of you here who has never written before and is feeling too anxious, I mean, trust me, it gets better with time. So none of us were born writers. It's a skill, and we work on it more and more and get better. So do introduce yourself in the chat box, and I'll directly start off with a short presentation, and then we can open for some questions. So I'll start talking with how to write for the public. Uh, all three of us here come from a medical and mostly a research background. So initially, personally for me, when I started writing, I found it very difficult to write for the public because I was very used to writing research papers, and my language was very scientific, and which would not be understood by the general public who's not coming from a research or a public health background. So this presentation mainly has a lot of things which I've picked up from other people over the past 4 years. 90% of this presentation is not original. A lot of people have contributed to what I've learned, and so I just want to acknowledge that. So step one to writing an article is to identify a problem. What should we write about? And this is the flow that I usually follow. So do I have any lived experience? So have I gone through anything which I want to write about? And this is a story from a year ago. I was traveling in the Vande Bharat Express. There was a call for a medical emergency. They were like, "Is there any doctor in the train?" And I went to see what the medical emergency was. And this was a patient who was having a acute coronary syndrome. He was having a heart attack. And when I asked for the emergency medicine kit, there was barely anything in it. The drugs which were there were expired. There was no BP cuff, no BP monitor, no stethoscope. There was no aspirin. Nothing was there in that medical kit. And thankfully, there was somebody in the train who was having the drugs. And so we loaded that person with the essential drugs and got him off at the next station. And so that made me look into what is the emergency medical care at inside the trains, and look at it from a historical perspective. What all policies have come out so far, and what is happening, how many people have complained. And then that's when we wrote this article. So when I have a lived experience of any issue, I try to write about it because that comes more from a personal experience. So that's the first question you should ask. Do I have any lived experiences? It might not just be something related to public health. It might be something personal. You might be dealing with a mental health problem which you feel you don't have access to care, or it might be some other social issue that you're dealing with, and you might want to write about it. So I think that's the most important place that where you can come from, because then your expertise is more than what others can tell you, because you have something which you have experienced yourself. And then the second question which I ask myself is there any other issue which is bothering me a lot? So, for example, the issue related to the poor drug regulation in the country is something that bothers me a lot. Issue of antimicrobial resistance is something that bothers me a lot. So I try to write about those issues then. And there, because it's just an issue which is bothering me and not my area of expertise, I try to collaborate with people who are expert in that area. For example, the Vidal test and the eye flu. There was a conjunctivitis outbreak last year during the rainy season, and there were a lot of antibiotics being prescribed. So both these articles have been written along with a microbiologist. The fixed dose combination and the tale of have money buy drug. These are because of poor drug regulation. Both of them have been written by a lawyer who is an activist in the field of drug regulation. So that's when I collaborate with others and I write articles, because my area of knowledge is not in depth. And so it's better to have some expert on board to write about that issue. So that's the second place where I write my article. Second way of choosing my topic is there any other issue besides lived experiences? And the last one is there any knowledge domain that I have, which I can freely write about? And that's, for me personally, it's palliative care. So end of life care, palliative care, pain relief, cancer care, that's my area of research and work. And so can I translate my research work into something simple for the general public to understand? Because oftentimes, as researchers, we believe that our job is only to do research, publish a paper, and stop there. But the major part of our work actually starts once the research paper is out, which is of communicating that to the public. So if you are doing some research work and heavily involved in one particular domain of public health or social science, try to write that as opinion articles or explainers for the general media, for Nivarana or Hindu or Times of India, whatever you get an opportunity. So that's the step one of how to pick an article, how to pick a topic. Now, there's a difference between a topic and an article. So a topic might be more broader, like I mean, maybe I want to write about cancer care in the country, but then you might have to pick what on cancer care do you want to write on. Do you want to write on how access to morphine is poor in the country for pain relief for cancer, or how end of life care is confusing in the country? For example, the Karnataka order recently on dignified death has been very misinterpreted across the country. So, do you want to write about that? So, you have to pick a specific question in that topic then to write about. The second, once you have done that, once you have picked a topic, once you have asked a question that you want to explain or write on, the next step is gathering content. If you're an expert in that domain, then you already have all the content. But if you're not, there are ways of understanding what has already been done. So first is you do a literature search. You can go through news articles which are already published, or you can go through academic papers, personal blogs. You can go through social media posts. For example, a lot of people on X will highlight issues, or LinkedIn will highlight issues. For example, recently about insurance claims is an issue which in India is becoming more and more common. And so you will get clues from social media first before it reaches newspapers. The problem will start getting highlighted in social media. So it's also important to be active in these social media places to understand what the public is dealing with. And lastly, you can also talk to experts to understand what has already happened in that domain. So, for example, I'll take the example of cancer again. So, you can search news articles on cancer, you can read recent papers on cancer or blog pieces. Some people specifically have blogs on cancer, or you can follow people who work in the cancer domain, either activists or researchers or doctors. You can follow their accounts on social media and see what they are tweeting about, or you can have conversation with other experts if you are not an expert in that domain. And that's how you try to understand what knowledge already exists on that specific question that you want to write on. So how do you search for literature? One thing is you can just, if you want to write on something on stroke care in India, you can go to Google and just type stroke care in India. What I personally do is I go to the news part and I see what is happening, because news will give you the latest articles. So that's one way of just simply doing a Google search with the specific keywords that you're looking for. And second is going to specific outlets on public health and then searching there if you want to write on something on public health. For example, there is Harvard Public Health Magazine. There is Think Global Health, Global Health Now. A lot of articles here are also on India. So that'll give you an idea, or they can also be on other global south countries or global north countries. So that'll give you an idea of what other people are writing, how they are writing, how they have addressed. Maybe you will find the same issue in another country, and they might have done something which might be possible to replicate in our country. And so it's important to read what is happening in other countries as well, and not just what is happening in India. So to specifically search for content in India, these are a bunch of outlets which focus on public health. There is India Development Review, there's Right to Health Resources, Nivarana is there, the India Forum, Ideas for India. I would say these are the only ones which focus mainly on development and public health issues. Uh, when it comes to international outlets, you could scan this QR code. This is a blog by Dr. Madhukar Pai, who has made a list of all the outlets globally where you can find public health related articles. This has everything from BMJ blog to PLOS medicine blog to Nivarana, list of all the blogs internationally that talk about public health. So once you've asked the question, what do you want to write? And then you have gone ahead and you have gathered all the data by either reading literature, talking to experts, going through social media. Next step is to frame the article now. Now you have all the material you need. You are sure what you want to write on. How do you frame that article? So first thing is that your article should be like a conversation you're having with the reader. It should not be you, it should not be a monologue where somebody is just talking. It should be in such a way that by the time the reader reads your first paragraph, the reader should have a question in their minds, and the next paragraph should answer that question. So in a way, it should be like a conversation with the reader. You are forcing the reader to think, and you're giving them the answers along the way, and you're giving them a direction to think with your article. So always think from the reader's perspective. So as a reader, I would think, why should I read the story? So if I'm going through the newspaper, uh, there will be some articles I'll read, some articles that I won't read. So I have to. So how I understand which one I have to read is firstly the art when I see the title. So if the title is of my interest, I would go and read that article. So if the title is too technical, I will zone out there only. So you have to choose the title in a way which is a thought that the reader might have. For example, the emergency in trains one, how is the emergency care in trains in India? Now, if somebody reads that article, that is exactly a thought that they might have had at some point. And then the opening paragraph becomes very important. So when they read the first few lines of a paragraph, most often when it starts with a story or the ground reality or your own lived experience, it's possible that the reader will connect with that article sooner and then start reading the entire piece. And if you start with too many numbers, 95.4% of people in India do not have access to palliative care, people will zone out there only because it's very difficult to picture what 95.4 looks like. So keep it in the opening para, at least keep it less number heavy, include personal stories or narratives or ground reality, which connects with the reader. And then when I've read the first paragraph, the next question that will come to my mind is, okay, this is a problem that the writer is introducing to me. How common is this problem? How serious is this problem? And so that should be the next part of your article. So if you're starting the article with a story, you are telling the person reading the article that this is the problem in the society or community or country or whatever. This is the issue that I want to talk about. The part following that should be, how serious is this issue? So, for example, if I'm writing an article on access to morphine in India, I would start by writing of how a patient came to me begging me that I should kill that person because they were in so much pain. They could not eat, they could not sleep. So they thought that dying was better than living with that pain. So I would start with that story. My next point would be that out of 10 people in last stage cancer, 9 people are like that. So that gives the person an idea of how common that is. Then the next part of your article should focus on what led to this problem, because that's how the thought process will be. Okay, this problem is so bad, this is so serious, this is so common. Why is this happening in the first place? And so give the reader the idea of what led to all these issues from developing. Was it a policy level issue? Was it an implementation level issue? Was it a provider level issue? Was it a patient level issue? Was it a social issue? What is the cultural issue? So list down all the factors that led to that problem occurring in the first place. And then the next would be, okay, these are the problems. So what is the solution? And that's how you should possibly end your article, because it's always good to end on a positive note by giving the reader that, giving some hope that this problem exists, but there are solutions. It could be solutions which are already existing in other countries, or it could be your potential ideas, which could be practical, or it could be, something that the expert might have told you that in their region this worked. And I mostly found that in India itself, because we are such a large country, most of the solutions exist in the country to problems. Just that nobody knows about those solutions. They are existing in one corner of the country. Nobody has written about that solution. For example, we recently published an article on the role of art in disability rehabilitation. Now, that was a beautiful article, and I had no idea about that being practiced, because that was happening in a tribal hospital in Tamil Nadu, in one corner of the country. Now, somebody took the effort to document that and write it. Now it has reached so many people. So writing also becomes a way of communicating solutions which you can already see existing in either your part of the country or somewhere that you have visited, or in some other part of the country or the world here. So it should come. So your writing should be like a conversation with the reader, and these are the set of questions that I usually think of when I'm writing the article. And then there's always that writer's block. How do I start? Even if you have the questions written down, there's always that thing of what should the opening line be, or what should the flow be. And this is something which I follow to get rid of that writer's block. So first thing I write on my document when I'm writing is I decide the theme. So I write my theme at the top, which is how does, for example, this was an article I thought of writing, but I never finished it, which was on how does conflict impact health and access to healthcare in India. Because Manipur violence had started, then there was a lot of caste violence, which is still going on in the country. And so I wanted to understand the different kinds of conflict and their impact on health. So first I created a broad outline. I put down, so my broad outline mostly has 4 or 5 points. So first point was scenario of health and access to healthcare in India. What are the reasons for poor health and access to healthcare? What are the types of conflict and how do they impact health and access to healthcare, and how can these conflicts be resolved? So this was my thought process, and I put these down as my broad outline. And the next thing that I do is I add subpoints to the broad outline. So, what is the scenario for health? How is it different between the poor and the rich, urban and the rural? Uh, why is the progress being so sluggish? So, that will be my subpoints for the first one. Then the second would be reasons for poor health. Is it lack of political will? It is industrial influence, conflicts, and then what I do after that is I collect references for each subpoint. So now I have a broad outline. I add subpoints to that. And after that, I collect references. So, for example, in caste conflict, what is the impact on health? What is access to health? For geographical conflict, what are the literature available? And so now I have my subpoints and I have a bunch of references for that. Now I read one by one and then I just add a line or two from each reference. So my to-do list will be on expand point one today, expand point two tomorrow. And so even if I'm not in the mood to write the entire article in one day, slowly over time, I'm able to finish that article. So this helps me break down that entire article into smaller to-do list tasks, which makes it more easier to write. And it doesn't seem like a huge task for me to write that whole article, which can be daunting for some people. And so expand one point at a time to arrive at your first draft. And this is something which I've learned again from one of my friends, that it's easier to edit a shitty first draft than to write the most perfect first draft. And most of us get stuck at that point where we think, that there'll be some calling. We'll have that heavenly calling that today we'll write the best piece. And when we are not in that perfect calling mood, we don't write that article. So don't wait for that. Just write the shittiest thing you can write. It can be the worst thing you've ever written. But trust me, it's so much easier to sit and edit that piece yourself rather than just coming up with that first draft. I've heard so many people say I started writing, but I threw 3 documents, I deleted 3 documents because it was not just turning out to be the best thing. Don't do that. Just finish that article with the help of your outline and then sit with it again over 2, 3 days and slowly edit it again and again. And so focus on writing the first shift draft without waiting for a calling at the right moment, because that's never going to come. Trust me, it's never going to come. And last thing is editing the flow. So now you might have come up with your version of your shit draft, which will be the first version of your draft. Now, how do you edit the flow of that draft? So I follow 2 kinds of flows. One is the flow of content and thought process. So it should be progressive. So if I'm starting with a problem, I should move to solution. If I'm starting with the worst thing, I should move to the better or the best thing. If I'm starting from the 1950, something which happened in 1950, I should move towards what is happening now. So the flow of content and thought should be progressive. But then there's also the flow of emotions in the article. So if your article is very uniform when it comes to emotion throughout, it's easier to lose interest in that article. So your emotions should keep changing in the article. So it should be highs and lows, and you can use stories to do that. So if you're giving a solution, you can again show how that solution did not work through a story. So emotions should fluctuate in the article to keep the reader interested. And words like but, however, yet, these words help the reader they help engage the reader more by changing that emotion suddenly. For example, India has 2 national programs prioritizing palliative care delivery. This is a positive emotion because yay, we have 2 programs. But however, the program have not received adequate funding, limiting their implementation. This is a negative emotion. Now, this paragraph is talking about barriers to palliative care, but you have changed the emotion in the same paragraph. So again, That's the kind of thing I practice. Flow of content, progressive. Flow of emotions, keep fluctuating. And to end my presentation with few tips, when I started writing, my one sentence used to have 30, 40 words. And then while reading my own drafts, I realized how difficult it was to understand those sentences, because by the time you reach the 20th word, you have forgotten what happened in the first 10 words. So it's always better to break your sentences down into at least 10 to 12 word per line. And because then when you start the next line, your brain registers what happened in the previous, because there's a pause in the middle. Don't have more than 3 to 4 lines in a paragraph, because long paragraphs make me at least feel lazy to read the entire article. So if there are shorter paragraphs, it's easier to read that also. One paragraph should have one key point. If you're talking about barriers, stick to barriers in that paragraph. If you're talking about facilitators, stick to facilitators in the paragraph. Don't mix two messages in one, two key points in one paragraph. And ultimately, one article should have only one key message. If you have 4 or 5 or 2 or 3 key messages coming from that same article, again, it's difficult for the reader to understand what should I take back from this article. So if you stick to one key message and focus on that, that's the potential of that article to have an impact is more than if you load the person with information. Rather break down your article into 2, 3 articles if you have too many things to say. But don't try to load your entire article with too many messages, because then that leaves the reader too overburdened with information, and possibly the chances of impact are less. Then while writing, while I'm writing the flow, I also tend to make sure that the last line of my paragraph introduces the next paragraph in a way that it helps the reader think as well. So it can be very direct, in which, for example, you can say that less than 4% of people have access to palliative care, and various barriers have resulted in this. So now the reader will ask, what are these barriers? And so my next paragraph starts with the barriers. At the policy level, these are the barriers. At the infrastructure level, these are the barriers. Or it can be indirectly by just continuing the flow. So maybe your one paragraph is just barrier one, paragraph two is barrier two, an explanation. So it's better to have that flow within your paragraphs as well. And wherever the flow is suddenly becoming different, and when the message is changing totally, include a subheading. And that again helps in connecting the article subheading to subheading. So subheadings in longer pieces then become very important, because that makes the article easier to read. One thing is to understand what audience you're writing for. If you're writing in a newspaper, your audience is mostly the general public, and so don't use technical terms. If you're writing for, say, some blog which has mostly academicians as readers, then you can use some technical terms. So be aware of who you are ultimately writing for. When we are writing for Nivarana, we are thinking that if it's a 12th standard or 11th standard student reading that article, they should be able to understand it with basic English. So they should not, we should not write in very fancy English. We should not write too many technical terms. So just know your audience that you're writing for. And one thing that you have to understand is fancy English is not always equal to good communication. So if you feel like, you don't know the Shakespeare level of English, so you should never write an article. I mean, that's not true, because you can write the best article with the most simple English possible. And writing opinion scientific articles is a skill, it's not a talent like I started with. It improves with practice. So don't think somebody is gifted. I mean, some people are gifted, but they are mostly into poetry, literature. I think that's more of a gift. But scientific writing is not a gift. Scientific writing is a skill which you develop and improve over time. So thank you. That's the first part of today's workshop. I'll be happy to take any questions now. That's my email ID. If you have any further doubts, feel free to reach out to me.